Hi there, I'm Jonathan Doidge. Welcome back to Sporting Lives, episode 12, part 2. And this is with leading sports psychologist and a man who's not afraid to have a controversial opinion on his subject, Dr Mark Nesti. Some real interesting stuff coming out of part 1. If you haven't watched that or listened to that yet, then feel free to pop off and do so before returning here, or you can just jump straight in here. Now, among Mark's high-profile appointments, shall we say, in sport, he has worked with Yorkshire County Cricket Club, also with Aston Villa and with Bolton Wanderers. And so that prompted me to ask him, really, is it easier to deal perhaps with cricketers, for example, than footballers? Here's what he had to say.
Gosh, it does depend on the individual. That's certainly one of them. So let's sweep that one away quickly. Cricket, I think, after golf. So I've done a bit of work with golfers over the years, and I used to think golf was the ultimate, and I still kind of do psychologically. But I have to say, cricket, particularly batting. But yeah, let's not let the bowlers go to this one as well. Let's not take that away. But in terms of the strange way that this sport is configured, where it's a team sport, it most definitely is, and it's complicated, and yet it's also very, very individual in a way that football isn't. It really is. You could be held to account. There's figures all over the place, and this time the figures mean something. They're really hard and really objective, and yet if you're obsessed with those figures, you're not delivering. So in terms of the nature and build of the sport, cricket looks, as a sport, the actual game itself looks much, much more psychological. Football, on the other hand, as you quite rightly say, I know they hate us to say this if we've not been their level as pros, but it's simple. And when they're more candid about it, it's simple. The bit that's not simple is everything that surrounds it. So what they deal with. So if we let's go back to trust. In terms of getting trust from cricketers as opposed to football, it's 10 times easier with cricket. It's not easy because they're still under pressure and the professional athletes, but it's considerably easier with them than with football. So it's not the football itself, it's everything that goes around it. I mean, the playing out there in terms of what you can do, because of the nature of the sport, I mean, it's structured chaos. Cricket, the length of the game, all the variables that listeners know better than I do. I've seen huge number of factors to deal with, and yet of course you're not meant to be concerning those too much to perform well. You're meant to be putting them on one side of your mind, and the other side is one ball at a time. Football is very, very simple in terms of the pitch, but it's everything else that surrounds it that is where the problems lie. You
clearly need to do lots of listening and probably significantly less talking a lot of the time doing your job. But are there moments, let's go into this way, again back to that old school feeling of sports psychology, mind over matter, it's soft if you need to talk to a sports psychologist. Are there moments then where, I guess there are moments where you've got to be a shoulder to cry on, metaphorically or possibly literally speaking? Are there moments when you go back to that player and say, to the effect of, come on, pull yourself together?
It's an interesting one, because I'm going to answer this by starting from theory. Just like, you're not talking about theory, but it's relevant. So in psychology, there's a range of different theories, and whichever one you subscribe to would affect, obviously, how you do your work. And I suppose I got myself into quite a bit of hot water over the years by subscribing to a non-American perspective. And without getting into the detail of all the different perspectives that there are, theories, I was dissatisfied with approaches that sounded either too mechanical, too structured, too impersonal, or the opposite to those, or it looked like the opposite, where they were too positive. Everything was positive. Everybody was to be positive. And I thought, this doesn't resonate with me, doesn't resonate with my beliefs, doesn't resonate with my life, the people I respect, my values. There must be something else. And I discovered something else, ironically, in North America, which was translated from various European languages, not English, but lots of other European languages. And it's called existential phenomenological psychology. There you are. That's great, isn't it?
Trips off the tongue.
Beautiful. But despite the term, this looked like real theory, as in it held a really positive place for negativity, being positive about negatives, adversity, sacrifice, suffering. These words were in the book. They were not in any of the other psychology books. And I thought, this is balanced. So the approach I use, which is partly my experience, partly my values, and partly my reading and studying, and not exclusively, is uncomfortable. Not all the time, but a lot of it is. So if we take something like anxiety, its view of being nervous, which I'm sure to most people would sound like common sense, but it's not amongst psychologists, which is, no, sometimes being nervous is the best thing you should be, because it means you really care about something, and that will precede a really great performance. Sometimes if you are too nervous, it'll choke you and you won't perform well. But whichever type of nerves or anxiety you have, they're all going to be bloody uncomfortable. Get on with it. Not a problem. Anxiety is not a problem. Feeling uncomfortable is not a problem. Stop this. Stop stress management unless it's needed. Stop removing anxiety with relaxation techniques unless they're needed. So I hear a lot about this now in terms of embracing it, but this is 150 years old psychology that's taken a long time to come round to the UK.
So just to try and put that then into context and build a picture of it, so could it be then that you're saying you're on a coach to a football game on a Saturday afternoon, you're feeling a bit, the heart rate's going up already, you're envisaging what might be going on, you're feeling a little bit of pressure, the palms get sweaty. That's just normal. You should just expect that, and you don't need to sit there listening to an hour's relaxation tape on the M1, wherever it is you're travelling, because actually you might then go out on the field not in that heightened state of arousal, is it? State of mind to be sharp enough to do the best job you can out there as a professional footballer.
Well, just to add to it, whether you're a professional footballer or amateur or whoever you are, whatever sport, if you're feeling nervous the way you've just described it, and you're also feeling excited at the same time, and some of my colleagues would say, well, you can't feel nervous and excited. It's one emotion or the other. It's like, I'm sorry, the last human beings I spoke to said we can actually have two feelings at the same time. Well, we don't understand theoretically. Well, I suggest you start from where people are. So if that person's feeling nervous the way you describe and feeling a bit sick and butterflies and the heart's pounding and they're excited, good place. They know it's a good place, particularly if they've been there before and it's led to good performance. You know the difference between being anxious when you've prepared and being anxious when you're saying, oh dear, this is a level beyond where I should be, or I actually haven't done the work and I'm going to get found out. That's the different type. So I just wanted a more balanced approach that would say, listen, positive stuff is good, positive thinking can be useful, but it's not sufficient. And actually, sometimes, if we're talking about developing the person psychologically, finding their own resources to deal with adversity. So everybody's talking about resilience training at the time. And that's kind of what that means. It means dealing with really uncomfortable things and yet finding a way to perform at a decent level.
A coach, a manager might give a player that sort of metaphorical kick up the backside. Is that something a sports psychologist can also do?
It's a really interesting difference between, and it's a lovely example because it's like, gosh, they almost did do that and worse. And as you say, it's more metaphorical now, but it's like, well, I think that's the difference though between the coach and the psychologist, or it should be, is one of the ways I describe it sometimes to athletes and players, and they get it really quickly, is, listen, the coach wants you to do the right thing. And there's usually a lot of you if it's team sport. So they might ask you a question, but usually they only give you 2 seconds to answer. They tell you, and that's fine, because that's good information usually, and it's important. But that isn't the best way to learn. The best way to learn is for you to tell yourself. Now, you can do that without another human being in the room, but sometimes if it's about something that you'd rather not look at, it's quite nice to have this strange figure who's usually part-time. So I've nearly always been part-time to make sure that I'm in and out. So inside and outside of it. So I'm not fully part of it, otherwise I just disappear into the wallpaper. Who dares to ask questions such as, given what you've just been telling me in our last 4 meetings, it seems to me that you need to consider whether this is where you should be. Should, given what you said is important to you in your life and as an athlete, should you be moving abroad? Should you be moving somewhere else? Because that's what you've been saying here. You haven't literally said that, but you've led to that, unless I'm misunderstanding my notes. Now that conversation can't go on with a manager or a coach. This is not all the time. Please understand, this isn't what I'm trying to do, clear clubs of their players and athletes. But at the same time, you want someone in the building who's either going to fight for their place or wants to be there properly. That's what all the staff want. And so in that sense, it can be really quite uncomfortable. That was just one example. So I'll often get a look across the table, and I'd like to swear, but I better not. But the look says something like, in more mild language, who the bloody hell are you to ask that question? To which the real answer is, I haven't asked it. You've asked it of yourself. I've just written it down and am providing it back, usually in some kind of report of some sort, to the person to consider it and reflect. Ultimately, because you want somebody to be the best they can be. So yeah, it's I've had people in tears. I haven't shouted at them, but those tears are tears of frustration at what they see they need to do or have not been doing. And that's questioning. So it's hard questioning, provocative sometimes, and maybe sometimes I might have gone over the top and I have to roll back a bit.
Any examples of that?
Possibly when not putting words into somebody's mouth, but where I have, which I try not to do if at all possible, but with the internet, and I'm old enough not to have been able to do this, but now, the click of a button, you can find out so much about someone before you sit with them. And I try now very hard not to do that. So maybe on occasions when I've actually had a little glimpse, and more than a glimpse, a real glance, and read, and now I've done what I know I shouldn't be doing, which is reading into their circumstances. And whether that's about, difficulties that they're having that might not be real, because it could be just media, social media and hearsay, or that I've read into their life story and their career, different aspects, failings, issues that they've avoided. So try really hard not to do that as much as I can.
Just let it develop naturally in that moment.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, folks, you're listening to Sporting Lives podcasts with myself, Jonathan Doidge, Dr Mark Nesti, sports psychologist, with me today. Once again, thanks to Ian Holding of Independent Content Services and Julian Barnes for helping facilitate this today. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying what you're listening to. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Doidge to find out any updates on future podcasts. We've got plenty of plans in the pipeline. I suppose a pointed question, really. What's the most jaw-dropping thing that a player, coach, person, professional sports person that you've dealt with has said to you?
That's a good question. This is not necessarily jaw-dropping, although to my colleagues, not all of them, but many of them in the university, it sounds like I'm a downer in universities, and I loved my university life. But I don't like these sorts of reactions. In terms of a very, very well-decorated coach, decorated as a coach and decorated as a player at the very highest level of the game. A fantastic guy, really grounded. You would have thought quite open to the new ways of doing things, but with a nod to the past. said, I understand the value of this because it helped me. I found my way though myself. I can't have somebody doing this type of work because it might be misunderstood that it's for people who have problems, that we will actually find more problems than there really are, that it will, if you like, cause people to overreact and open up a can of worms. And so I'm not prepared to go down that path, even though I can appreciate the value in it. Now, when I've told academic colleagues this, they're like, that's deeply irrational. I think you need to sit and speak to that person. I said, I did. We had lots of conversations. And there was quite a lot of depth when you pushed to that. And so I think the bigger issue there is this is a controversial subject. And you can't force psychology on people. They need to be ready. They need to be convinced. Doesn't mean you should do heavy sell. You should try to explain it, help people to understand. But I really think, unlike a lot of disciplines, particularly the physical disciplines, where if the athlete's sitting there thinking, I don't know quite why I'm doing this, it would be great if they appreciated it. But you can still get a strength change, even though somebody says, I don't know why I'm actually doing this. Psychology, you really need the person to be committed to the value of it. And for me, I was prepared to work with that individual because I respected that that was possible. I think my academic colleagues thought that I was doing that just to stay in the building. And maybe some of that was true.
It wasn't the answer. I was kind of, I don't know if I was hoping for an answer like this, but when I said jaw dropping, it might have been, you know, I went home last night and found the striker and the left winger in bed with the wife and my daughter or something like that, you know.
Oh, right. If you want to...
Oh, there's loads of those examples.
If you want to drop this to the now defunct news of the world, then we can go there if you want. I certainly remember seeing more from staff rather than from players, and staff opening up, particularly in the kind of intense life that they lead when they're on campaign, whatever the sport happens to be. I mean, all of those team sports, this huge amount of time spent away from families and with each other. It really is so close to the military metaphor. And in terms of being the psychologist out socialising, and maybe at 1 o'clock in the morning in a nightclub or wherever we happen to be, and members of staff, so not the players. I think actually a lot of the players, the modern players, are quite dull and boring, which is rather good in some ways. In other ways, it's not. That's another programme altogether. But staff telling me things about their personal lives, about relationships, and then in later years showing me things. I don't know if I need to go here too far with this, but showing me things on it's like, that's quite remarkable. That, you know, red really is the right colour for you, that dress. It's like, well, the psychologist, you know, surely the psychologist is above making value judgments, because psychologists are superhuman, they don't have any values. So it's like, wow, this is ridiculous. I'm on duty all the time, and as the hour is moving late into the night, I'm hearing all sorts of stuff. It's like, don't do marriage guidance.
2 more lagers, please. Carry on talking. Must be some interesting revelations, I'm sure. Mental toughness. What is it?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, is this one of those we've not got enough time left on the recording?
No, we have. It's a term that was used and has been used by all sorts of people, not just in sport, but, you know, especially, particularly in sport, to talk about being able to react positively to adversity, to being able to deal with all the pressures that we've been talking about here and all the demands, and get back on your feet. And so it should have stayed there. It should have stayed as the terminology that coaches use. And unfortunately, it entered into the universities and they started measuring it. And it's like, don't measure this term. leave it as a term that's used amongst coaches and amongst people playing sport who have a good understanding really what it means. Don't start breaking it down into 47 different factors and then measuring it. It's not necessary, not least because we haven't got enough of it at the moment.
Well, it's not like the sort of shoe thing, is it, where you put your heel against the bar, pull a thing up to the top of your big toe, and you know exactly what size you are. What are the biggest challenges that currently face sports psychology then, Mark?
I mean, I think if you were listening back to this, you'll see there's some suggestions there already in terms of, ironically, being too theoretical and being too detached from the world of sport. And then sometimes, if you like, people coming in who the real knowledge and understanding is just based on sport or just general life, and so lack depth and lack substance. What can they add to the knowledge of the coaches? I think now I can say this. I would have said it even when I was in the university, and it's probably why I never got a full professor status in the end and remained as an associate professor or a reader for many, many years. That's not the whole real reason, it's part of it. Is it would be great if this was not actually in the universities. I can't think of what the other institution would be, but somewhere where the applied aspect and the kind of research that supports applied work was more acceptable, more understood and well received. And I don't think that's where we are at the moment. So that's a real problem, because when you go into sport environments, coaches and other staff expect you to have something different to offer, but they expect that you will understand their culture. If you don't understand the culture of performance sport, you'll be going back out the door. So to learn that means that our students and masters need to have placements. They need to be in there, doing real work alongside people who've done this work before, and that is not happening, and that's dangerous for this very, very new profession.
There's obviously a lot of intelligence with these people who are doing these studies, but that's a kind of emotional intelligence then, if you like, and an addendum to that academic intelligence. And I know academia is about the cut and thrust of a good argument. Dr Mark Nesti writes his paper. If I was ever bright enough to be a doctor, Jonathan Doidge might argue back with that theory and then proffer another one, and so on and so forth. And that's what you need. And you don't take that personally, I wouldn't have thought, as long as it's reasoned. Although maybe looking at the eye roll, you do, depending on who it's come from, possibly a rival or something like that. So yeah, it clearly sounds like a difficult challenge for sports psychology if there isn't a general consensus of getting people out there in the field. Surely you've got to have that.
I think they want them in the field, but I think that they, who are the they I'm talking about? Well, let's not get down to that, because that could be dull to say that, but the general drift of people and organisations who could allow that and help that to happen. I don't think that they respect the field enough. I don't think they respect the people on the ground enough. I think that they will come across sometimes as, they've just come over the hill with all the answers. That it can come across as pompous. It can come across as a little bit arrogant at times. I don't think there's enough, and this is not just in sports psychology, this is right across the piece. We could talk about all sorts of other factors now if you wanted to bounce off into politics, and we can go everywhere. But in terms of recognising the kind of exactly...
You need to go to the pub.
Indeed. the kind of knowledge and understanding that is in sport, even though it's not always expressed in scientific terms, and sometimes it's expressed in quite colourful language as well. So I think that has caused real difficulties around acceptance. So I think to actually get into those environments, it's like, listen, you're the guest. We are the guest in there. So actually, little will be a lot. Don't try to do too much. I know you'll feel that you should. And take time to understand the kind of knowledge that there is in there. Most top-level coaches are really good psychologists. They've acquired that through their lives. If they're not, they're going out the door.
And they just don't have it necessarily on a piece of paper.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just one more really to fire at you, which is your own field as a sports psychologist. Who do you go to see when you're anxious, about your own performance, matters, life, whatever it might be. When you've got your own maybe mental health issues to discuss, who do sports psychologists go and see?
Go up for a walk in the hills and just feel that's
get your mind over matter.
Indeed, that's a semi-serious answer, which is I do go places, whether it's some people do this anyway in their everyday life, go out and cycle or somewhere where in the countryside so we can think. But I know your more serious point is listen, you need another. If you've been saying another human being is important for dialogue, where's your other human beings? And then it's a reality that the person closest to you, who typically usually will listen without offering too much advice, my wife, sorry, I need to change that for the era that we're in, and she will sometimes help in ways of substance and content, and that's fantastic. And she understands me fully and well. But usually she's just there, and whether she's truly listening, she'll often tell me she's not been, but that doesn't really matter because that's effective. And then I have a close colleague who has lived a similar life, and he works at the moment in rugby league and a couple of Premiership clubs at the same time, which is a massive tall order, as well as having an academic background. And he understands. So it's speaking to somebody who really understands that world. Quite frankly, if he wasn't around, it would be pretty difficult. I think I would probably have to, if I could, search out somebody who works in business, high performance environment where there's lots and lots of stress, which can be good, of course, but lots of fast moving, volatile environments where it's not always rational, but we're trying to do something that's quite difficult. And speak to those people, listen to them, just get stuff off your chest.
Two more. Just briefly, once, going back a long time ago now, before I started to work in media, I was working in financial services, and I went for a job with another company. It was a financial services sales, advisor job, but basically to all intents and purposes, a sales job. And the interviewer introduced himself to me, sat me down, explained his background first. He was a former psychological nurse, and he was now a sales manager, and he was building up his sales team. Asked me to tell me all about himself. That was pretty much the interview. What did I enjoy doing? And I remember at the time saying I played cricket and I was captain of a team. Where do you bat? I said, usually middle order. I try and work it so that everybody in the team's happy, and I'll slot in where we need somebody. I open the bowling, because that's just what I do. Blah blah blah. And at the end of the interview, I shook my hand. Thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure meeting you, Jonathan. Disappeared off home. Late that night, got the call. Thanks very much for coming in today. Really appreciate it. Great chat. You've not got the job. So I said, go on, why? And he said, well, throughout that conversation, you were mainly looking after your teammates and making sure that the equilibrium in the team was nicely balanced, and you didn't want to upset anybody as the captain of that team. And what I want in my sales team is somebody who's going to take that by the scruff of the neck, say they're the best batsman, say they're the best bowler, prepared to trample over other people to get those sales. What I'm coming towards here is that, do you have those skills, if you like, as a sports psychologist? Would you be able to sit here in a conversation with somebody of similar ilk and go, not sure he's cut out for the job as an opening batsman on the back of what I've just heard, or is he really a keeper rather than a striker? Mm-hmm. He's a bit too defensive and not enough on the attack.
Yeah, I think that's massively overstating the importance and value of psychological assessment. There's so many other things that are important. We're not just about our psychological qualities and skills, values, and deeper character traits that allow you to do things that, if you like, are quite difficult for you. So I'm interested in all those sorts of things. So I think that's the sort of thing that gives psychologists a real bad name. It's like too much. Yeah, I thought you were going to slightly take it in a different direction about, had I ever seen players who were totally, as far as you could ever say this, self-interested, and the team was just a vehicle to their aspirations? Or had I seen the opposite, people who could have really been something and didn't achieve what they were because they sacrificed themselves for the team?
Go on.
And I have. I've seen both of those. And so in the dialogue, that becomes apparent, and then it becomes very, you can imagine, very uncomfortable. But I would say this, wouldn't I? But I am going to, and now I'd love to drop names. And of course I won't. I really would love to.
God, just...
I can't. Maybe at the very end, my last sad book that nobody ever reads anyway might have a couple in. But what a joy it's been to... This sounds very unprofessional, because I've actually felt sometimes, I probably have when I've actually left the session, punching the air and saying, I knew that was possible. I knew that was right. Sitting with athletes, individual athletes, as well as footballers, rugby league, motor racing, cricket, and tennis. I said individual athletes as well, didn't I? From 1995 to this point now, and swimming. And the most impressive performers nearly always are wrestling constantly with both of those things, and the very most impressive have found a place of, this is going to sound really strange, but a place of kind of detachment and peace from that conflict. That's the next level. And that if you were to look at what they're saying, you'd say, I daren't ask if this person is interested in how well they do, and I daren't ask about their team, because it's absolutely clear they see the two as completely interrelated. And those people exist, and they exist in the very best performers. So that's perfect psychology, and it's exciting to meet those people. So I knew I was right.
And then the future, and we know you mentioned, you've alluded to retiring from John Moores University of Liverpool. Is any more? I suppose you never give up as an academic, do you? Because you're constantly thinking about stuff, and you probably work on things and maybe some papers, despite the fact that you're not doing a full-time lecturing type role. What about the future of, your own future, but the future of sports psychology? So what are you going to be doing in the next few years? And if we came back and did this podcast in a decade, where would you want to have seen sports psychology move to at that point?
Okay, I'll try and pick that one up at the end, because that's less egocentric. But the egocentric one, in terms of retiring, not really early, but I suppose academics consider it early because they fall over if they want. And you're quite right. I don't know how you know this, but I have got a book, and I've been involved in 6 or 7 books before. Some I've written myself, some are co-authored. And I've never been satisfied with any of them. Like many people who write, it just has never been the pure process I wanted it to be. They're never good enough because you run out of time, all those things. And it's like I promised myself that I would write one that was better than that, and I would share it with people who really can write, the really clever geeks who were at school, not people like us who were a wee bit better at sport. And this book is on almost psychology meets philosophy. But that sounds very academic and dry, but I hope it won't be. It'll be on sport, and it'll be particularly focusing on the words and terms that I have heard on the ground amongst the people, that many of the academics, particularly in psychology and sports psychology, are deeply embarrassed about and shy away for. And these words would be, which are all over sport. So courage, sacrifice, suffering, I've mentioned them before, creativity, intuition, and love. And definitely love. It's like, you can't use that word. It's like, but it's all over sport. Beauty is all over sport. Well, these words have got nothing to do with performance. They most certainly have. So it's a task. It's taken me 2 years so far. It looks a complete mess, but you're quite right. I will be continuing with that. And the other project, we'll see if it comes to fruition, is an organisation in New York who a couple of years contacted me out of the blue, and it's like, I hope this happens because it's just so crazy and wonderful. And they are surgeons and chaplains, and they work together currently trying to design research studies that will capture the attention of insurance companies, because they've anecdotally noticed, this is the surgeons, different types of surgeons, have noticed that people who have a spiritual worldview of some sort, whatever that may be, religious or not, that their healing and rehabilitation is typically much faster. And so the surgeons are interested because they want to be great surgeons, and the chaplains are interested because it's their domain, and they saw that I'd written about how important spirituality and faith is to lots of Premiership players because we have a global league. And they think, which is the little fly in the ointment, but they are Americans after all, wonderful folks, great energy. But one of the conversations around, Mark, can you design some prayer interventions to help? It's like, oh dear, that's not my boat. That's not what I'm talking about. So we're a long way apart from each other, but in another way we're not, because we're talking about how, particularly in high-level sport, it's not just psychological skills and qualities people draw on. They will draw on spiritual aspects of their personality to deal with performance pressures as well as injury and healing. And it's like, well, I'm going to mention it, even though everybody seems very embarrassed about it this side of the pond.
That sounds really interesting, that old link between sport, religion, all the catharsis and all those sort of things that sports sociologists will tend to talk about. What's the working title, by the way, for your Philosophy Meets Psychology book?
There is no working title yet. That's right. The mistake I've made before.
I'm looking forward to that coming out, because I want to, in fact, we'll come back and do another podcast on that at the time, because that sounds like a cracker. Mark, it's been a brilliant experience spending an hour or so with you talking about sports psychology and your own career and involvement, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was good fun.